It's game one of the 88 World Series, A's at Dodgers. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Mike Madrid. Check out his show with Chuck Rocha, the Latino Vote Podcast, his book, The Latino Century, and his Substack, The Great Transformation. Recently, you were in D.C. speaking at Georgetown, did a CNN spot talking about the Super Bowl halftime show. Today, back on home turf Dodger country in the 1980s. Ventura County born and raised, parents immigrated from Mexico. Let's hit play at the start of that decade. How did Fernando Valenzuela's 81 title run with Los Angeles play into your origins and the origins of your sports fandom?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and thanks again for having me. This is a fantastic opportunity to kind of peel back some of the layers on my own journey with baseball and love of the Dodgers and my career trajectory, life trajectory, really. So thanks. Look, 1981, I was 10 years old, which is sort of that magic era of sports, right? For a young boy kind of watching his home team. And remember, at this time, Los Angeles is undergoing some really significant demographic transformation. Latino voices were starting to pop up here and there. The population was increasing quite dramatically. And for the first time, this, 19, 20-year-old kid from Sonora, Mexico, I think his town was a village of 15 people, comes on to the scene. And Sonora is where my grandmother is from. That's where my people are from, just desert people in northern Mexico. And this guy comes on the board, doesn't speak a word of English, and he's from rural Mexico. And the whole city of Los Angeles is just electric as this guy comes onto the scene and throws 8 or 9 shutout games in a row in his rookie year. And he throws a screwball. Like, who throws a screwball? It's like him and Elmer Fudd or Bugs Bunny, right? Like, nobody throws a screwball. And it was this moment, this hard to explain, of how electric it was to be a 10-year-old and have somebody of your ethnicity that you could see and relate to in your family with the team that you loved go on to, be contenders for world championship. It was just a perfect way that baseball is supposed to be written.
And how important is Fernando Mania? I mean, definitely with your family, but also in the broader LA area for Dodgers fandom, and as a catalyst for that among California Latinos.
It's hard to put in words how significant that moment was. And maybe it was a little bit exaggerated because, again, I was a 10-year-old boy who could see my family and a funny last name and, physical characteristics of, somebody who was not a Steve Garvey or a Ron Say or a Jerry Royce, taking the diamond. But it also, his arrival on the scene coincides with, again, this exploding Latino community in the City of Angels. And in a lot of ways, the ESPN's done this great 30 for 30 on Fernando Mania. It's well worth the watch. If you haven't put that in your queue yet, queue it up, take a watch. It does show how significant the moment was for Los Angeles.
I'll link it in the show notes, folks.
Yeah,
I'll link it in the show notes. If people after this podcast want companion viewing and listening,
watch Fernando Mania. It's a 30 for 30, very well done. But remember also, there's some ghosts that the Los Angeles Dodgers have to put to rest with the Latino community. The story of Chavez Ravine, which the city of Los Angeles and the Dodgers used eminent domain to move hundreds of Latino families out of their homes, took their homes to build Dodger Stadium, was this old wound. A lot of my mother's family knew a lot of those families in Chavez Ravine who lost their homes. My grandfather, made a commitment to never go to that stadium, and he held true to that through his death. He would never go to Dodger Stadium because of what happened. So in many ways, Fernando Mania kind of brought the Dodgers and LA and Latinos full circle, where they were criticized, rightfully so, for taking so much from the Latino experience in Los Angeles. But then this young kid comes in as a gift that really resurrects the zeitgeist, as you would say, of the moment, captures the moment of something that was emerging in the country.
Yeah, and that 81 playoff campaign gets off the ground when Valenzuela's complete game masterpiece staves off elimination against Houston. The other day, a Texas State Senate district saw a 31-point swing from last cycle, and you're one of the foremost experts, especially prescient back in 2024. What are the complications involved with finding Latino voting trends in Texas and applying them to other states like California or vice versa?
So again, this is why I'm loving this show. Is a big part of my work has been looking at the difference between Texas Hispanics, as they say in Texas, and California Latinos, as we say in California. We are different. We've politicized different. We've become, in many ways, very unique in the way that we have sought political power, the way our voting trends have worked. At the moment, of course, in this era with ICE raids and crackdowns and what's happening with the federal government, you are starting to see Latinos, Hispanics, Mexican Americans voting like Cubans, like Puerto Ricans, like Dominican Republic, all of these diasporas where we have always said Latinos are not monolithic are now, for really the first time, becoming a monolithic voting bloc, and where this ethnic cohesion never really existed, it is arriving at this moment. And in many ways, it feels like kind of the reverse of Fernando Mania, because you're seeing a community come together, but where it was for positive aspirational reasons with Fernando, it's the exact opposite. It's for negative reasons. It's for defensive purposes. It's because the community perceives itself as under attack. But that same sense of unity, that's all the old things that used to divide us, different foods between Cubans and Mexicans, and different cultural aspects, different accents, different intonations. None of that matters at the moment. All this realization is that we all got to look out for each other. We've got to all behave the same way if we're going to be able to make it work in this country at this moment.
Yeah, and now we travel to 1988 on the precipice of this all-California World Series. But first, the National League Championship Series, Game 7, Los Angeles Dodgers versus New York Mets. Does anything stand out to you between the Latino communities of LA and NY as far as differences in how they approach politics or even sports fandom?
There's so many differences, but again, that baseball becomes a common denominator. I remember that series really well because, again, this is happening while I'm a senior in high school in 1988. And the Mets were a really good team. And the truth about this 1988 Dodgers team is they really didn't belong there. I mean, it was just guts and grit and just scrappy team. That Oral Hershiser is a standout, but you really can't name a whole lot of members of that Dodgers squad. They just had a lot of heart. Gibson, of course, Kirk Gibson, who plays only that first game in the World Series, and otherwise wasn't a huge factor. But look, the Puerto Rican diaspora is unique. They're all unique, but Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans, I think, have had very different experiences. Puerto Ricans, of course, are U.S. citizens by birth. Their experience has largely been on the East Coast, New York specifically. My good friend John Leguizamo, who I got to know when I was doing work on the Lincoln Project, always appears on shows when we're together wearing a New York Mets hat. He represents, and that is the Puerto Rican experience. That is your team. I, of course, grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles, where I wear a Los Angeles cap. And to me, that's the only Latino team. I can't understand anybody different. But when I hear his story and hear his experience, how could you be anything other than a Yankees or a Mets fan? Because that's what the Puerto Rican experience is. And again, that's kind of the beauty of baseball, right? It's that connection of who we are, and it brings us together beyond diasporas, even though we've got rival teams playing one another. Voting, by the way, incidentally, Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans vote very, very similarly and always have. Even with this kind of rightward shift that has been more evident over the past 3 or 4 election cycles, I thought, okay, even Mexican Americans in Texas are becoming a little bit more Republican. Puerto Ricans, no way, but that absolutely has happened as well. And again, this moment, this political moment, what is most fascinating for me as somebody who's studied Latino voters for 35 years, is even as the communities are getting more diverse, they're voting more cohesively as a bloc than at any time that I can really remember. So just kind of one of those peculiarities of of what makes us different may oftentimes make us what is more the same.
And I recommend folks check out Mike Madrid's YouTube videos on differences by which country immigrated from and which state governed under, and how that impacts so many nuances there, and great uh, explainers from Mike. Folks, check that out. The Dodgers jump on the Mets early, forcing Doc Gooden, who had already started twice that series, and he puts out the fire, but it's already too late. Oral Hershiser shuts him down at Dodger Stadium Wednesday night, where his team will remain Saturday when Oakland comes to town. Obviously, it's more important to win the World Series than the NLCS, but let's come at it from a different angle. Die Hard, currently in theaters October 88. A New York cop flies to LA, and one of the animating themes is the culture shock. Back in the 80s, did it seem like there was more of a cultural rivalry between LA and New York, or LA and the Bay Area?
That's such a great question. Look, I was raised in a Mexican Catholic working class home, right? And what we were taught was, you don't hate anything, but my dad would pull me aside and say, you're allowed to hate three things, son. You're allowed to hate Dallas Cowboys, Boston Celtics, but most of all, the New York Yankees. Those you can be forgiven for. And so sports were a big part of our life growing up and the way we kind of viewed the world. I've always viewed, and again, I think it's probably because of the bias I have as a 10-year-old, kid in that age range, watching, a rookie named Bobby Welch for the Dodgers striking out Reggie Jackson in the World Series, and watching the Yankees break my heart, when they won the World Series in the '78 series, and then the Dodgers coming back and winning 2 years later against the Yankees. Like, that's, to me, will always be the greatest rivalry, including, of course, the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn in the '55 game and all of that storied history that these two institutions have. But being in California and being, a National League team, there is a rivalry between North and South in the state. There just is. And the changing economies over my career, my lifetime. When I was a kid growing up, Southern California was this incredibly vibrant, economically powerful, increasingly diverse part of the state. The San Jose Peninsula Bay Area it wasn't a backwater. I mean, San Francisco's always been a prominent part of California history, but it was definitely second place. At the end of 1988, the end of this year, this really important year that you're asking about, everything changes. The wall comes down in Berlin. The Cold War ends. And a lot of the economic cutbacks from the defense industrial complex start to hit California really significantly. All the federal spending that former California Governor Reagan and then President Reagan, invested in to win the Cold War, we start dialing all that back. And all of the defense spending in Southern California starts to go away. And it happens right as the rise of the internet economy starts to happen in the very early 1980s, and Silicon Valley becomes a thing, and it becomes the real dominant economic engine in the state. And that, of course, creates these regional rivalries. The A's and the Giants starts to become something in the early 90s, right? They have their famous World Series, Battle of the Bay with the earthquake, World Series. A couple of years after the '88 World Series, and so in many ways, this New York Mets battle, leads to this battle with the Oakland A's, and it really signifies the end of an era economically for Southern California, where I'm becoming an adult, the end of the Cold War, and the end of my childhood entering into adulthood, like winning it, the child's game, right? Baseball, you end up winning a world championship in your senior year. But perhaps, just as importantly is this transformation, Thomas, that I see on TV. Now, let me take you back a little bit here. You have to remember, baseball was viewed very differently then. There was no ESPN back then. There was no streaming. You got to see a couple of baseball games of your home team, every week. but you didn't see other teams very much. So 1988 in the World Series is the first time that I see Jose Canseco and Mark McGwire. It's the first time I'd ever seen them on TV. And they were enormous. Now, I didn't know why they were enormous, right? But this is the beginning. And we've got Oral Hershiser, who's like a scarecrow. He's got this thin little wiry frame, and he's standing up against these just beasts of men. I'd never seen men that big before. And so I was like, well, these guys are like Goliaths. What is this? Like, we're playing linebackers here. And so it was the end of this older game and the advent of the steroid era. And it was so striking to watch that first game of the series because I had never seen baseball players that big, and there was no real explanation. We didn't know what it was yet. And so, it was that series to me personally, and like you're saying, the zeitgeist of the era, it was both the end of an era and the opening of a new era in my own life, in the country, in the game, in the regions of the state. It was just a really pivotal moment that will forever be, in kind of my heart and mind of what was a really profound chapter in all of those things for me.
Yeah, and the Bash Bros come to town. Oakland heavily favored after sweeping the Boston Red Sox, and then we have the '88 election a few weeks away. Bush Dukakis, Nancy Reagan's going to throw out the first pitch in this one, but the A's have emerged emphatically from their 1980s wilderness. As you mentioned, two Rookie of the Year winners in Canseco, McGwire. Walt Weiss makes it third straight. And so the A's go from not in the postseason to 104 wins in '88, 10 more than LA, another turnaround story. But they did just upset the 100-win Mets, who were an '80s juggernaut then. They get to play at Chavez Ravine and the complicated background north of downtown LA for both Game 7 versus the Mets and Game 1 versus the A's, because home field rotated purely based on league and division back then, not record. What's your confidence level like after dispatching the Mets? And were there athletics fans running around where you were growing up and going to school just north of LA County?
My confidence was very, very low. Look, as I said, the Dodgers had no business beating the Mets for the pennant, for the NL pennant. Like, no, but the late '80s Mets were a dominant force. I mean, they were an incredible baseball team. I can still name more Mets from their starting lineup than the '88 Dodgers. Like, they're stacked. They were stacked, and they were just quantifiably a better team than the Dodgers. But the team somehow ekes it out in the way that kind of baseball only can over 7 games. And remember now, as you said in the intro here, Oral Hershiser, which was the one really amazing thing we had going for us that year. I mean, Gibson was already beat up by the postseason. And Doc Gooden, like Oral Hershiser and Doc Gooden, Game 7, like that's just good baseball. And so what that means, though, is Game 1 against the A's, who are an even better team, a better team than the Mets. We got basically a bullpen game. Like we know who's going to start, but they're not going to go more than a couple innings. We're going to just piece this Game 1. Like this is the best we've got. Is this Band-Aids, paper clips, a little bit of Elmer's glue, and some
rookie Game 1 start.
Yeah, it was just brutal. Like, there's no way we could beat these guys. And then, the game starts in beautiful Southern California in this afternoon, and you're watching this game, and it's like I said, you're seeing the size of these players going, this is like, are we like a little league team? Like, we have no business here. So I thought there was no way. I was just so profoundly excited that they beat the Mets and got into this World Series game, and that this is just going to be embarrassing. Like, we're going to be humiliated. And then, of course, Mickey Hatcher, of all people, Mickey Hatcher hits this first inning shot. I don't think and listeners are probably going, who is Mickey Hatcher? Mickey Hatcher was just like, journeyman utility player who was probably barely batting over the Mendoza line. I think he hit one home run that year.
Yep.
One or two, one or something. And
One home run during the season.
One home run during the season. And he hits a home run, and he had this funny run, this funny gait, and he just sped around the bases because he was so excited. And, before the ball hit the stands, I think he was already past third. Like he was, so, you realize, okay, wait, whatever magic these guys had, it was just pure heart, just pure fight and desire on behalf of the 88 Dodgers when they had no business playing these better teams, but they weren't going to go away quietly. They were going to show up. They were going to fight.
Yeah, and it seemed like, I don't know if it's hubris or just the way you do it back then, but the Dodgers, a rookie in the mound, Sporting News Rookie of the Year for the NL, but Tim Belcher, big spot. He beans Jose, he hits Jose Canseco with the pitch, and they get out of the inning, that first inning without giving up any runs. They get out of that first inning without giving up any runs, but they do get what seemed like a retaliation pitch by Dave Stewart. Drills Steve Sachs even harder.
Mm-hmm.
So Steve Sachs will go home on that Mickey Hatcher 2-run shot. As you mentioned, Hatcher was not prepared for that ball to go over the fence. He's running way too hard off the plate.
It's funny to watch even now. You're like, the guy he hit one home run. Like the last home run he hit was probably as a high school senior or something, and somehow he finds himself in the World Series. This ball carried in the dry Southern California sun and air, and it got over. Yeah, it's a great, funny moment to watch.
Yeah. So in that succession, it's probably up and down. You go from the pregame broadcast. Nancy Reagan throws first pitch and gives her "Just Say No" pitch to the nation, and then in that same pregame, oh yeah, Kirk Gibson, the NL MVP, is scratched. Good luck. But then Mickey Hatcher, who utility guys you mentioned, moves over to left field and slaps one out, and that hitting Steve Sachs, Dave Stewart locks in right after that, but that run will come home, and that could come up big later on. Does this get you dialed in to seeing, Hatcher go yard after having that shot to the gut of Gibson getting scratched from the lineup card?
Yeah, and I can't tell you. It's hard to let people know how big Gibson was as a spark plug. Just his presence, he had just this mental fortitude to be like, we're not ever out of this. We're gonna fight. We're gonna do this on sheer will. Like we're just gonna believe so determinedly in our own team and ability to overcome whatever it is. Like losing is not an option. And it was fun to watch because it was just kind of unbelievable. Like we don't have the pieces to win anything here, but you had this guy who was absolutely locked in and believed it. So when he's scratched, like when he's saying, I can't play, that was really a big blow. And of course, Hershiser had just gone game 7, as we mentioned, against Doc Gooden, against the Mets a couple days before. So he can't go. So you've literally got nothing. Like that's game 1 is when you bring your best, right? Let's go. We got 7 games, got to win 4 of these things, got to get out front of this thing. We had nothing. We had Tim Belcher, who would become an A later on, going against Dave Stewart, who started his career as a Dodger, incidentally. And so there's some of that fan stuff going on. But, we don't know how we're going to get. I don't know how Lasorda doesn't know how he's going to get through the game. He's got to piecemeal it. And then Hatcher, goes yard. Like you said, just slaps one out. You start to see this kind of spark. You don't want to, it's like baseball. You don't want to allow yourself to believe sometimes because it hurts. The heartbreak will be too much. But you do, because this team had done it over and over again when they had no business. Again, beating the Mets was really extraordinary. Even that series, that game, that 7-game series against the New York Mets for the NL championships is really one of the underrated series because it was a battle. Like this team showed up with way outmatched and they end up winning. And you start to believe maybe they can do it again. But again, the A's were a better team than the Mets. And just like lightning can't strike twice in the same spot, or can it?
Yeah, and Dave Stewart, a 21 game winner, 104 win team, the Oakland Athletics. I think the market implied win probability from the betting market was like well over 60% for the Athletics, and they're big dogs against the Mets too. But Stewart once again shows his form, faces their next best hitter next to Goodson, Mike Marshall, strikeout swinging. And then John Shelby ground out takes us to the second inning where Canseco gets it all back and then some with a grand slam off Belcher. The Cuban-born immigrant led the majors in home runs, and finishing fourth was his fellow young teammate out of Pomona, California, Mark McGuire. Did you respect Canseco's game and the Bash Brothers thing? I know it seemed like they're much larger in stature than anything you'd seen. But did you like the whole thing he had going on with McGuire as you learn more about that team, seeing them for the first time?
You had to, Thomas. I mean, it was something baseball hadn't seen before. You know, the big home run sluggers before that were like guys like, Greg Luzinski, a designated hitter, or Babe Ruth, right? These guys were not these Adonises. They were not Greek gods. Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire were. Like they were just these models of what manhood could be. And when they would hit it out, like it wasn't like Mickey Hatcher slapping it and crawling out over the fence and hoping that the air carries a little bit. Like they would destroy baseballs. And the way that they owned the plate just by their presence, like I said, for somebody who'd never seen these guys play. I'd never seen the A's play all year. And there was no highlight reels. We had something called TWIB back then, This Week in Baseball, which was a 1-hour show on Saturday mornings that would cover all 24 teams or whatever it was at the time. And so you would get to see these very small snippets, but you would never see like a full American League game. That's just not the way baseball worked back then. So the World Series was a really big deal because there was no interleague play. You never saw other teams come to your stadium or on TV. That was the only time you saw the American League, except for the All-Star game. So your question is a great one because it's so hard to have people today understand how significant that was in baseball back then. This was the first time you get to see an American League team, an American League baseball, and the way that they're constituted. And they were just so physically dominant. I was hearing you mention like Shelby, John Shelby, and even Marshall. Like these guys were old. Their bodies were like old baseball players. Nobody would be like, "Oh my God, these guys are big, towering, masculine men and cut and worked out." Canseco and McGuire were these young, just studly. These are the guys that you want on the front of the line. In a war between the Greeks and the Persians. Like that's what you wanted. Like that's what they were. So you had to respect it. Yeah, and then they would Canseco goes yard, and this is where you start to really like your heartbreak. He hit the ball so hard that grand slam in the second inning. I think it was second inning, right? He hits his granny, and Thomas, it hits the camera. It hit the camera lens.
That's so awesome.
It was like Thor throwing like a lightning bolt, and literally it didn't just shake the camera. The screen went black. He knocked out the camera. Like it cracked the center lens of the center field camera that is the angle that gives you that look over the pitcher's shoulder and into the batter's box. He broke it. He that's where he hit the ball, and so. It was just kind of like, it was almost like The Natural. Like you can't make that up. If it was part of a baseball novel, you'd be like, okay, goofy and over the top, but that's what happened. And so for a split second, the screen goes black because he destroyed the ball, it destroyed the camera, and then they went to other camera angles. But like I said, you can't not respect that. That's like Goliath coming out and showing David just how big of a monster he is and what he's just capable of.
Yeah, and yeah, the natural great '80s baseball movie, and Canseco would get some of those comparisons when he was in the minors in Texas. The A's drafted Canseco in the 15th round out of Miami Coral Park High, but then eventually Rookie of the Year in California in the majors with the A's. In California, they've recently responded to mid-decade redistricting in Texas with some of their own ahead of 26 midterms. Florida and other states aggressively redistricted at the start of the decade. You do a lot of analysis on Latino voters as a swingy demographic and whether certain state map gerrymanders might backfire for the party, or what is known as a dummy mander. Where do very much fluid Latino voting trends put the dummy mander most in play out of Texas, Florida, and California?
Boy, this is a great show, man. You do your homework on this stuff too. Yeah, what a great thread. You got this Cuban-born kid who's Rookie of the Year, comes out to California, where it's largely Mexican-American, but began a lot of his career in Texas. Those are the three big ones. Those are the three big states, Latino states, where all of this was happening, really primarily at that time too. Late 80s, early 90s is when these voters start to come online. And, these processes of gerrymandering and what I call a dummy mander are sort of arcane, abstract things. Gerrymandering is where you kind of draw the lines to try to advantage your own party with elections coming up. The Texas Republicans earlier last year in 2025, believing that this huge rightward shift that happened in 2024, a lot of Latino young men under 30, kind of that Canseco profile, shifted to the right to Republicans. And they believed that this was kind of this permanent realignment. And so what they did was, mid-decade, very rare move. You're only supposed to do it once every 10 years. They decide that they're going to carve out a bunch of more Hispanic seats because Hispanic voters were moving towards Republicans. If they do that, they can become a dominant force and pick up 5 seats and maybe protect and keep their hold of Congress. But what we've seen in 2025 and 26 is these young Latino men, as you said, the largest swing group in America, the only group, I would argue, that is really moving back and forth between the parties as wildly and as in historic and significant numbers as Latinos are. They're the only swing group in America that's really behaving the way that they are. They're not a reliable vote for either party, and I'm proud of that. But what it means for Texas Republicans is they may have, it's kind of an own goal. They may have created their own problem for themselves. At least 3 of the 5 seats that they created for the Republican Party are likely to go to the Democrats because Latinos are bailing on the Republicans at rates really, really significantly, really quickly. And so I think that, people taking the Latino vote for granted based off of these old stereotypes are going to really regret it. And I think this year, 2026, will be the first time that we see that in living color, where Republicans thinking that this was part of a new permanent majority for them were profoundly wrong just a year after Democrats who believed that Latinos would forever be a Democratic constituency were also profoundly wrong. So big lessons for both parties. Latino voters, you can't take them for granted. Just like Canseco, you never want to miss your location because it'd make you pay.
Yeah, you don't want to walk an American League pitcher on base so that an extra run can cross the plate when Canseco hits the camera. It's 4-2 coming out of the second inning. A's back in the lead. Canseco, a Miami-raised immigrant with working-class parents. Mark McGuire, LA-born and LA private school. How important is sports as a cultural thread and means of connection between people from different economic backgrounds and cultural vantage points?
Well, I mean, look, it's a national game for a reason. I love that you did that background. I didn't know that about McGuire, but in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense, right? I didn't know that he was an LA guy, and I didn't know he
Yeah,
was
Pomona.
Pomona. Okay, great. That's fascinating. But again, the fact that they're the Bash brothers, right? These two guys from very different backgrounds. One a working class Latino kid from Florida. The other one is sort of an upper middle class, upper income, white guy from a private school in Pomona. Both meet on the diamond, and they both kind of start thrilling the game. They redefine the game. The jury will be out probably forever on how and if it was a good thing or a bad thing for the sport. But there's no question that that era was the beginning of something entirely new. And one of the beauties of baseball is going back from the very beginnings, it has always brought people of very different classes into the same stadium. Now, they may be seated in different places, and the way we do our stadiums now with luxury boxes does isolate, I think, those that are more moneyed from the average person. And of course, the older history of the game, and one that we need to be taking a renewed look at, is black players were clearly, before Jackie Robinson, not allowed to play the game, and those in the stands were segregated, if they were allowed in at all, black fans. So that's why we have the Negro Leagues. So baseball has been a reflection of class and race ever since the first time we built grandstands and chalked up a diamond. Who could play, who could manage, who could actually attend, and not only attend, but where they sat, right, has always been a big part of the game. And I think that we've done a lot to kind of ameliorate that, a lot. But as we're learning in our politics, a lot of these old ghosts die hard, if ever. I mean, one of the big debates right now, Thomas, is the Dodgers are going to go back to the White House to celebrate their World Series championship. This is just a few days after the president posted a really horrible racist meme about the Obamas, black American political figures. How does that feel if you're Dave Roberts going and shaking, Donald Trump's hand, or Mookie Betts? What does it mean when the franchise that broke the color barrier with Jackie Robinson is now kind of, acknowledging that this is part of the country and the game again in the same way? Are we really making the progress that we think we are? And look, I know a lot of people have a lot of problems with bringing politics into baseball, bringing politics into sports. Guys, politics is culture, and culture is sports. They're inextricable. The way our culture in America is indelibly etched with sports, and I would say baseball more than any other, because it's been with us for so much longer than any other sport. So I don't think we can or should extricate those two. So your question about McGuire and Canseco kind of crossing economic lines is a really good one. I think we're not as I think in many ways we've lost some of that as we've kind of built the economics of baseball around the luxury box and the luxury experience that is available only to people that can spend an inordinate amount of money compared to those that can, it's very expensive to go as a working class family. It's you and your wife and your 3 kids. You're going to drop, $1,000 sometimes to, for 5 people with the parking and, the tickets and hot dogs and a beer and a souvenir. It's expensive. It's expensive for working class people. And unfortunately, in this country, working class people are increasingly of one ethnicity, and those that are not are of another.
And I'll stand for mixed income sections in the stadium and mixed income neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Not and it seems like you have that at Dodger Stadium here in '88. The crowd pops are wild on the broadcast. And even though not much going offensively for a few innings till we get to the 6th, when future Angels manager Mike Scioscia lines one to left field, driving in Marshall and cutting the deficit to 4-3. Lasorda said, maybe jokingly, that he made Mike Scioscia a catcher because he's Italian. Probably also helped learn Spanish to communicate with Valenzuela in the early 80s as they won a World Series together. Grew up near Philly, right on the Jersey line. Is there some commonality between the Latino and Italian U.S. communities in terms of sentiments or policies that offer them an appealing vision, or what might alienate them? And could this explain some of the elasticity we've been seeing in New Jersey?
That's such a great question too. Again, I think so. I mean, a couple things about the game. For Scioscia's this Italian guy who was really known for his defense. He was an incredibly good defensive catcher, as a lot of catchers are or were. Like the offensive catcher, and again, most of these guys aren't standouts because of what they do, but the Will Smith on the Dodgers, for example, I mean, that was like, or those were not normal catchers that could do both. That wasn't expected. That's why Johnny Bench, for example, was so exceptional, or going deeper back to like a Roy Campanella. Like that was not expected of a catcher. They're running the game, and that's what you were looking for, sort of the captain of the team. And that's the role that Scioscia really filled. I don't think he ever batted over 220, 230 in his entire career. So for him to kind of come up big in that moment was a really, really big deal. And again, just kind of everybody stepping up and doing their part the way championship teams always do. The fact that he learned Spanish, of course, to manage his pitcher, says everything you need to know about kind of his leadership style, this quiet captain of those ball clubs in the 80s. And he becomes ultimately, Scioscia becomes the skipper for the Angels, the manager for the Los Angeles or the California Angels at the time. But the question about the Italian ethnicity is such a good one. And this is really, as a student of Latino politics, has always been kind of the control group. Italians, of course, are ethnically very distinct from other Western Europeans, very Catholic, certainly Mediterranean, and they emigrate here for in larger numbers at the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s. And they begin their own American journey where they were, viewed derisively. They were not welcomed into the American table. They weren't white. Neither were Irish immigrants, right? The Irish and the Italians, largely because they were Catholic groups, that was the distinction that really mattered back in the early 1900s, is were you Protestant or Catholic, and that kind of really determined whiteness. By the 30s, by the second, third generation, what you're seeing is this fluidity and this kind of dropping the Italian, the hyphen, the Italian American, Irish American, and people are just kind of identifying as exclusively American. That fluidity, which you're talking about, and it's a great observation, is precisely what those of us who watch Latinos and what's happening demographically and politically are trying to find out: is will Latinos stop being Mexican Americans and just start identifying as American? Will they stop identifying as Cuban Americans and just as American, the same way that Italians and the Irish did, a century ago? Or will they sort of kind of maintain this sort of aggrieved racial identity? All of the data, not all, but most of it, is showing that they are beginning to assimilate very similarly to Italians. So a Pudge Rodriguez is a lot more like a Mike Scioscia than not, for example. They're becoming more self-identifying. About 2/3 by the second generation identify as typically American, according to Pew Research. And by the third generation, the grandchildren of immigrants, there's really not much of a discernible difference. The majority of Hispanics don't speak any Spanish by that third generation. And that number grows. Interracial marriage rates are over 50%. It's more likely you will marry a non-Hispanic than a Hispanic. And a lot of people with Hispanic surnames don't really even identify anymore as Hispanic, even though they may have the last name Madrid or Valenzuela or Rodriguez. They're just not ethnically anchored the way that they were. So again, great question. Scioscia is a perfect example of that. And I think that's a great example of what is happening with Hispanic Americans in a lot of ways.
RBI to cut the deficit to 1. We stay within 1 because the Dodgers bullpen wouldn't allow any insurance for the A's. Lasorda calls in 17-game winner, gets 3 scoreless from Tim Leary, who before the year had pitched over 100 innings in the Mexican League. He would put on his uniform in Santa Monica and then commute to Mexico for his games, and then pitched a full MLB season. Ended up ranking behind only Gibson and Hershiser in wins above replacement for that season. So him and he's a huge part of getting them to Alejandro Pena, immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and he was a rookie in that 81 Dodgers run. He gets the ball in the 8th inning down a run. Pena riding with them since early in the decade. Who are the 80s Dodgers you were most fond of?
Wow, that's a great question too. And again, the Dodgers for me. Remember, I'm a 10-year-old kid and with Fernando Manny in '81. 8 years later, I'm a senior in high school, right? Which were pretty dry years for Dodger fans. We weren't doing much that time as I'm my teen years as I'm exiting childhood and becoming an adult. The magic years, the when baseball is like when you still think you can be a major league ball player and there are still heroes, right? Garvey at first, Lopes at second, Russell at short, Say at third. That infield, which I think to this day is still the longest, year by year, they were the infield that stayed together the longest in baseball history. Those names will forever be a big part of my experience. And Steve Garvey ran for the United States Senate last year or 2024. As a Republican politics. And so it was fascinating to see kind of even that coming full circle is, this guy whose baseball cards I collected and treasured and, would watch, and you're always hoping for that home run when Popeye, right? They called him Popeye because the size of his forearms were so big. And he was kind of the first baseman for the Dodgers. He was that home run that you needed. He was that cleanup hitter. Those are the names that I remember most from my childhood. That early Bobby Welch season as a rookie coming up and slaying the Yankees and Reggie Jackson especially. But I think it will forever be Garvey, Lopes, Russell, and Say. That infield will forever be kind of burned in my heart as the Dodger infield.
A few years earlier, Pena actually had the league's lowest ERA as a starter in '84. He ended up needing major shoulder surgery, gets the nickname Slow, as they talk about in the 8th inning here, moved to reliever and mastered the off-speed stuff to become a valuable arm out of the bullpen. So 1-run game, he takes the mound. How crucial is that team-first mentality in politics? Having Beto loses a couple times, but just goes back and builds the infrastructure, not as much of a self-aggrandizing path. Or Talrico going to, surrogate for Remit and the Texas Special. How important is that teamwork, both that team first mentality that you see with the Dodgers, also in politics?
Thomas, you know what? In 35 years of my involvement in politics, I have never been asked that question, and it's a really good one. And the reason why I'm kind of pausing here and thinking about it is because one of the real big secrets about politics is that most of your enemies are actually in your own team. Your greatest threats and challengers, if you're a Republican, are in the Republican Party because they're the ones that are going to compete with you for every step up the ladder that you go. And so the teamwork in politics is all done for self-serving purposes. Now, the politicians will deny this, but every professional knows that it's true. And I'm probably saying something that you're not going to hear much. But the biggest threats to your career, if you're a Republican, are not the Democrats. And the biggest threat to your career, if you're a Democrat, is not the Republicans. It's the people in your own party. And the reason why you go and help is you try to build some political chits. But they're all done for one self-serving reasons. And you're also keenly aware that whatever political capital you build up with somebody else in the business may either never come to fruition or you could end up being backstabbed at a moment's notice. So there's very little teamwork compared to what you see in a sport like baseball, where you have to have that team mentality and you have to not only rely on each other to turn that double play, to know where they're going to be, to have the confidence that when they go up to the plate that they're going to somehow get on base despite all of the odds. And it builds that sort of a culture. In many ways, politics is the exact opposite. And again, I'm going to spend some time reflecting on that a little bit more because I've never been asked that question, and it's just such a good one. But my immediate reaction is to say, in 3+ decades of doing this, the people on your team are usually the most significant threat to your ability to kind of keep progressing on the ladder. And that you will never hear a politician say that because it's not politic. And you'll probably not hear a lot of consultants say that because they're so embedded in the party system. But it is absolutely 100% true. And if you're having a conversation with somebody outside of politics at the higher levels of the game, as it were, they would say exactly what I just told you.
And we're going to see some nasty work, not against the same team, but against the same position, pitcher on pitcher. Dave Stewart, as we mentioned, in the second inning, got walked on. An AL pitcher walked on base in the World Series in an NL park. Alejandro Pena would say, nah, eso no va a suceder. Dave Stewart, strike three, looking almost falling to his knees. The bottom dropped out on that curveball, but still caught the strike zone. Nasty work against, once again, back when they let you commit such acts against an American League pitcher in the World Series. Pena eventually gets us to bottom of the ninth, still just one swing away at 4-3. And here's Dennis the Menace, goes Vince Scully, rest in peace. Dennis Eckersley, 45 saves on the season, ALCS MVP, gets the pop-up, strikeout looking on Hamilton, right-handed sidearm that breaks left to right and paints the left corner, looking bleak. Pro Baseball Reference gave Oakland a 96% chance of winning at this point. Are you able to stay seated or even stay in the room as Mike Davis comes in to pinch hit?
I remember this every moment of this. I don't want to say like it was yesterday, but it's a moment in my life I've replayed over and over and over and over again. I was at my best friend Scott's house. We were with another really good friend named Keith. It was the three of us watching the game. Keith was a Yankees fan, and he was just kind of a Dodger hater, but we loved him anyway. He was with us. But Scott and I were huge Dodgers fans, and we were up in his loft. They had a loft up in his house in a little city called Moore Park in Ventura County, and we were just pacing because somehow the Dodgers find themselves in this game. Like at this point, we're looking at these guys. By the first inning, you're going, this is going to be a 12-2 game by the ninth. Like, how are we going to get out of this with our pride intact? They're still very much in this game, and of course, Vinny's voice, and I know a lot of people, probably think that the Vin Scully aura is overplayed. It's not. And the narration of Vin Scully, calling a game, let alone a Dodger game, with this type of tension, is both calming and exhilarating at the same time. There's something about his voice where he could capture a moment perfectly, but also calm the fan base down and make them realize like it's just a game and it's awesome and it's great, but it's not like the end of the world. And the voice of Vin Scully at this moment is it's something profound. And to me personally, let me explain why. My father was a teenager when he heard Vin Scully call a Koufax no-hitter. I was a teenager when I heard Scully call a Valenzuela no-hitter. My son was a teenager when he heard Scully call a Kershaw no-hitter. Like, those moments don't leave you when you're a sports fan or when you're a Dodgers fan. Those are moments, those games you'll remember forever. And to have it be told in the same voice is just such a multi-generational bond that it's just transcendent. To have the magic of baseball being called in these incredible moments with these incredible players by the same man. And so here he is. Here's Vin Scully leading us into the ninth. leading David up to face Goliath, still in there, still in this thing by some act of God. There's nobody, as you were saying, the odds are saying this should have been put away a long time ago. Shouldn't be a close game. And yet, the ninth inning, the curtain rises, and you feel this somehow, even though your mind is telling you there's no way that they're going to win, the fact that they're still standing in there, there's a chance. There's hope. You got to believe, right? You got to believe in the magic of the game. And that's kind of where it begins when Mike Davis kind of starts the inning off.
Yeah. Mike Davis had some good years in Oakland, then struggled once he signed to LA, got benched, but some redemption, pinch hitting here. He walks on with 2 outs. Throughout that at bat, they're cutting to Gibson in the dugout, looking restless. And then when Davis reaches base, Gibson dragging himself out for warm-up swings. What's going through your mind here as Gibson goes out to battle Eckersley?
So the first thing to keep in mind is, as monstrous as the A's are, right? The Canseco, the McGuire, the Stewarts, all of them. You just go through that lineup. It's still a remarkable lineup. Eckersley is their closer. Like Eck is a beast. Like he's unhittable, this guy, right? And he comes out to close this thing. And then that's exactly what happens is the camera pans to the dugout and Vinny, in his unique way, says, and look who's up walking around in the dugout. And he's scratched. So it's like, is he just there? Your immediate reaction is he's just there to remind them not to give up. He's not there to play. He couldn't possibly be. But he's there to steal this team the way he did through all the pain and all the suffering he did since the All-Star break. This guy played as a broken man. Both legs are just broken. It's the end of this long season. He's carried the team on his back, this big Bad News Bears team on his back for months. And so clearly what he's there to do is to excite them and engage them. At this moment, when you first see him, and Vinny's not giving any clues because Vinny doesn't know either. He's just like, this is extraordinary. Look who's in the dugout. You're excited because he's there, because his presence means something to that team. But on those first few looks into the dugout, I remember Scott and I looking at each other going, there's no way he's coming to play. He can't. He's so beat up. He's so injured. He can barely walk. It wasn't one leg. It was both legs were busted up. So you feel something exciting. Something is building. There's something bigger than you can put into words. But at this moment, you still think it's just his presence is going to be enough to somehow keep these guys competitive, especially with Davis on first base.
Yep. Torn hammy on one leg and then a sprained MCL he picked up in Game 7 against the Mets on the other leg, and fighting off pitches down 0-2 in the at-bat, unable to put much weight on either leg until 8 pitches in, 3-2 count. The hero of the 1984 World Series with the Detroit Tigers, Kirk Gibson, the guy they're hoping comes through with 2 outs in the ninth, catches a hanging breaking ball from Eckersley. Unbelievable. People should go watch the clip Sound On with Vin Scully and Joe Garagiola. And she's gone. I don't believe what I just saw. His teammates are helping him around the bases. He's pumping his fist. Is it a similar scene at your friend's in your friend's living room?
Well, it's absolute mayhem. Our friend Keith is kind of like shocked and kind of like sinking into the Barca Lounge. Again, he's a Yankees fan, wants the Dodgers to lose. Scott and I are just jumping up and down on the couch and just throwing popcorn and just kind of running around and just out of our minds, completely out of our minds. Remember when he comes out of the dugout, hamstring and I just don't know how he does this, but he's battling up there at the plate. It goes 3-2, as you just mentioned. Eckersley brings a backdoor slider, which is just his put away pitch. And that pitch it's still, I mean, it kind of in lore, that was what the scouting report said. And pencil or pen, the way they used to handwrite these notes is, look for that backdoor slider. This is where it's going to come. And Gibson hits it off of his front foot, and it's all arms. And he catches it, and it goes out to the right field stands. And right as it gets lift, it's gone. Because how can it not be? At this point, it's so storybook. The ending is so storybook that it can't end any other way than walking off a home run from the hero of the whole season, completely broken and busted up, where David just lands that rock right between Goliath's eyes. And the pandemonium of the moment. And it's one of Vince Scully's, maybe I would say probably his best calls. And like I said, he called a couple of Koufax perfectos. He called, he called more no-hitters than most teams have thrown in their whole history. This guy's called, right? Like, and the part of the magic of the moment was the silence. And as you mentioned, Dodger Stadium is a very big stadium. It's 57,000 full, but it's open. It's just open. So to get really loud, I mean, there's a lot of pandemonium going on, and you can see the stands, rocking, just people just going absolutely nuts. And then the quiet is the perfect setup. Is Scully had this magical way of letting the noise of the crowd tell the story. He goes quiet until Gibson almost hits second base, and then he says, in a season that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. Just Shakespeare, just perfect. That's exactly what the whole season was. That's what the moment was. This was not possible. None of this is possible. And yet, of course, that's what baseball brings. Gibson pumps his right arm twice in that image that every Dodger fan is kind of baptized with, and when you're accepted into the community, and you will never forget as the most hallowed moment of our franchise's history. And then everybody just kind of loses their mind, and it's such a big moment. Thomas says the only thing that could have possibly made this better would have been a Game 7 walk-off. But the damage is now so done that this team, in this way, with this excitement, you knew at that point the Dodgers were going to win this series. You just knew. And the A's knew. It took so much out of them emotionally to lose it, and to lose it that way. There was no way the Dodgers were going to lose this World Series, because it had to have a storybook ending, even more so than what that moment allowed for. So just extraordinary, life-changing. I mean, I know it may sound goofy, but truly, it's the greatest sports moment of my life. It's still ranked as one of the top 3, top 5, and top 100 lists, not just of baseball, but of like all sports. Like, it was that big of a moment.
The most Game 7, Game 1 there perhaps ever was.
Yeah.
And they don't need 7. They win it in 5. They go through the 90s, some decent teams, but they don't get back and win a postseason game until the 21st century. Late 90s, the Lakers are back, though, and kind of a turbulent decade in Los Angeles. A lot of great things as well. But in an area with so many different communities, how important is it for like a society to look over and see someone in the same Dodgers jersey or Lakers jersey, someone that perhaps you might not have interacted with otherwise, or from a different community? How important is that kind of bond through sports in Los Angeles?
So you just set that up perfectly. There's so much to this, because again, in the early 80s, it was showtime for the Lakers, right? It was an exciting time. And the Rams were in LA too. Vince Ferragamo was a quarterback and, goes to the Super Bowl. And the Dodgers, of course, were winning championships, and they were a force. in the early 80s, being a sports fan in Los Angeles was something really special. Being in Los Angeles was something really special. Remember the 1984 Olympics, one of the best games ever held in the world was in Los Angeles. So it was an incredible time to be a young kid and to love sports and to love Los Angeles and to always be having something exciting to be cheering about. That changes after the 88 game. That game was the exclamation points to a decade and an era. As I said, Los Angeles changed after the end of the Cold War. The world changed. California changed. The demography changed. And now I'm actually working on a book on this. I'll have to come back when it's done in a couple of years, and we'll visit with you again. But Los Angeles has a really tortured relationship with race and race relations. And you wouldn't think so because the narrative of LA is we're this big, diverse, multicultural city. The truth is we're the city that had the Zoot Suit riots in the 40s, the Watts riots in the 60s, the Rodney King riots in the 90s, and these ICE raids and crackdowns in the 2020s. Like every generation sees some social upheaval directly related to our inability to be a healthy, pluralistic community. Even though we're one of the most diverse societies in America, we kind of stop the story there. We don't talk enough about how challenging it is to work towards all getting along. As Rodney King famously said, can't we all just get along? I mean, that's the $1 million question. And we still don't know the answer to that. But where there is still hope is with baseball. It's with sports generally. There's no question about that. Sports bring a team, a city together, rich, poor, black, brown, white, Asian, even now internationally. You go to Dodger Stadium now and a good 25% of the attendees are from Japan. Like flew across the Pacific to go to these games. I remember traveling through Los Angeles for work on campaigns, and if you were taking public transit, there would be Japanese people, tourists there in Dodger jerseys. They're out here in California going to games. So then they would, tour and see the rest of the state and see what the city had to offer. So, this team is they're kind of the Avengers. I understand that they're the villain of baseball right now, right? They're looking at a possible three-peat right here, and people are pissed that they may be buying it. But one of the really beautiful things about this team is it's probably the most racially, ethnically diverse teams ever assembled of any sport in history. You've got 3 Japanese players, you've got black players, you've got Latino players, you've got white players, you've got everything. And they all make it work. They're all these superstars that despite their racial and ethnic differences, despite their citizenship differences, they're a team. And there's something romantic about that, about what a city can be, about what a country can be, is they're rewriting the way people can interact together and struggle together and sacrifice for each other. And my hope is that that's ultimately where the country can someday get to.